The room that shouldn't exist. While renovating the house, a family discovers a secret room that doesn't appear in any plans. Inside, there are antique furniture pieces and a window that looks out onto a place no one recognizes, a place that seems alive and observing. The sunlight filtered through the trees, creating a pattern of dancing shadows on the floor of the old Thompson house. I, David, stood at the forefront, watching as my son Jake and my daughter Lily played amidst the debris of the renovation. The house, with its worn walls and air of abandonment, possessed a peculiar beauty. I had always dreamed of restoring it, bringing it back to its former glory, and now that dream was finally becoming a reality. "Look, Dad!" Jake shouted, holding up a piece of wood he had found on the floor. "This is a treasure." "A real treasure, or just a piece of wood?" I joked, moving closer to see what he had found. "I think it's a treasure," Lily replied, her wide smile full of enthusiasm. "We can make a boat out of it." Their energy filled me with hope. It was a new beginning for our family, a way to reconnect and leave behind the challenges we had faced in recent years. The house had a history, and I was determined to uncover every detail. With each nail I pulled out and each peeling layer of paint I revealed, uncovering what lay hidden beneath the surface. As the kids had their fun, I turned to the wall we had decided to tear down. The sound of the hammer echoed through the empty space, and dust rose in clouds as the boards separated. Each strike brought me one step closer to revelation, and excitement surged in my chest. "Be careful, don't hurt yourselves," I called out, keeping my eyes on them. "Just because we're renovating doesn't mean we can be reckless." "Relax, Dad. We're just exploring," Jake replied, laughing. He had always been the more adventurous one, while Lily was more cautious. When I finally managed to knock down the last board, a dark space was revealed before us. A mix of curiosity and apprehension coursed through me. "I wonder what's inside," I asked, looking at my children. "Let's find out," Jake exclaimed, his bravery reminding me of myself as a child. "Wait a minute, Jake," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Let's see if it's safe first." Cautiously, I grabbed a flashlight and turned it on, illuminating the space that had been hidden behind the wall. What I found left me speechless. It was a secret room, covered in dust and cobwebs, as if time had stopped inside. The antique furniture was draped in white sheets, and an atmosphere of mystery enveloped the place. "Wow!" Lily whispered, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Look at this. It's like a fairy tale." "A fairy tale or a horror movie?" I joked, but the truth was that the room intrigued me. What could have happened here? Jake was the first to step inside, his adventurous spirit not allowing fear to take over. He pulled the sheet off one of the furniture pieces, revealing an old rocking chair, its legs creaking under the weight of time. I followed him, carefully observing every detail. "Look at this window." Jake pointed, and my heart raced as I saw what appeared to be an ordinary window, but upon looking through it, I noticed something peculiar. The landscape outside was not what I expected. There was a distortion, as if reality was being shaped by something dark. "Is everything okay, Dad?" Lily asked, a bit hesitantly, noticing the expression on my face. "Yeah, it's different," I replied, trying to mask my apprehension. The scenery looked like a nightmare, with twisted trees and an overcast sky that made no sense. It was as if we were looking into an alternate world, a place where light did not reach. "Let's explore more," Jake said, but I interrupted him. "Hold on. We need to be careful. We don't know what else might be here." Jake's expression shifted to a mix of frustration and curiosity, but he knew I was right. The atmosphere was heavy, and the dust seemed to carry a type of energy I couldn't identify. Lily began to explore the furniture, running her hand across an old table. "It seems like no one has been here in a long time," she commented, her soft voice breaking the silence. "That's true," I agreed. It's a sign that this room has its own story. As we continued to explore, I noticed something strange. The air seemed to vibrate, as if it were charged with contained emotions. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if the walls held secrets that weren't ready to be revealed. "Let's take a closer look at those books on the shelf," I suggested, pointing to a dusty bookshelf in a dark corner of the room. As we approached, I noticed the books were dusty but still intact. Jake pulled one of them out, carefully opening the cover. "Look, Dad. It's a diary," he exclaimed, but before I could respond, a cold breeze swept through the room, causing the flashlight's beam to flicker. "That's not good," I murmured to myself, but curiosity was stronger. The diary could be the key to understanding what had happened here. "Let's take this home and read it together," I said, trying to remain calm. "We need to learn more about this house and its story." Jake and Lily agreed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The heavy ambience, the whispers that seemed to echo between the walls, all of it left me unsettled. "Why are you so worried, Dad?" Jake asked, noticing my expression. "I'm just thinking. This room has an air of mystery, and we need to be careful," I replied, trying to be honest without alarming them. "Let's go back to the others and tell them what we found," Lily suggested, excited. I agreed, but as we moved away from the room, I couldn't help but feel that something had changed. The house, which had once seemed like a home full of promise, now exuded a sense of anticipation, as if it were waiting for something. When we left the room, I closed the door behind us, but the feeling that what we had left behind was just beginning to reveal itself would not leave me. The old Thompson house held secrets, and I was about to discover that some of them were darker than I could imagine. The atmosphere was thick and charged when I decided to explore the secret room that Jake and Lily had found. The walls were covered in dust, and the dim light filtering through a window draped in cobwebs gave me the sense that time had stopped inside. As my feet shuffled over the wooden floor, the creaking seemed to echo, as if the house were whispering secrets that had long been buried. "Emily, are you sure you want to go in?" Jake asked, hesitating. He stood behind me, his voice low and concerned. I could see that he was nervous, and that only fueled my curiosity. What could be hidden in there? "Of course. We can't just ignore this," I replied, looking at the half-open door of the room. "Who knows what else we might find?" The desire to uncover what was hidden behind that door was overwhelming. The room seemed to call out to me. As soon as I stepped in, a wave of cold washed over me. The air was heavy, and the smell of mildew and aged wood filled my lungs. My eyes quickly adjusted to the dimness, and I could see antique furniture covered in white sheets, like sleeping ghosts waiting to be awakened. "Look at this!" Lily exclaimed, pulling one of the sheets away. The movement created a cloud of dust, making me cough as I looked around. "Honey, look at this." She stood in front of a shelf filled with books that seemed as old as the house itself. "It's amazing," Jake said, moving closer. "These must be treasures that no one has touched in decades." The excitement in his voice was palpable. But at the same time, there was a shadow of apprehension in his eyes. He had always been the more cautious one in the family. While they explored the shelf, I heard a whisper. It was soft, almost like a breeze, but enough to make my heart race. "Did you hear that?" I asked, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. "What did you hear?" Jake asked, furrowing his brow but not taking his eyes off the books. "It sounded like someone was speaking." "I don't know, maybe it's just my imagination," I replied, forcing a smile. But the feeling that we were not alone in that room was undeniable. I approached an old table in the center of the room. On it, there was a drawer slightly ajar, and curiosity led me to pull it open completely. ##### inside, I found a diary, its pages yellowed and worn from years of neglect. "Guys, come here," I called, holding the diary as if it were a precious artifact. Jake and Lily joined me, and I could see the curiosity shining in their eyes. "What did you find?" Jake asked, leaning in to take a look. "A diary," I replied, opening it carefully. The pages were written in elegant handwriting, but what caught my attention the most were the dates. "Look at this. It belonged to the former owner of the house, Margaret." "Margaret? I've never heard of her," Lily commented, looking at me with interest. "It seems she lived here in the late 19th century, I said, already reaching for the page. "What does it say?" I began to read aloud. "My heart belongs to him, but society will not allow our love to bloom." The words were intense, and as I read, the atmosphere around us seemed to change. They were not just words, they were echoes of a past life, a forbidden love that still reverberated through the walls of the house. "This is so romantic, but tragic," Lily murmured, her eyes shining with emotion. "What happened to her?" "From what I can see, she was in love with someone from a rival family. And it looks like there was a loss, a child," I said, my voice faltering as I continued to read. "She mentions a place where they met secretly. It must have been a special spot for them." As I read, the atmosphere in the room felt heavier, as if Margaret's emotions were seeping into us. I could feel the sadness and passion pouring from her words. "This is so sad," I whispered, closing the diary for a moment. "She lived a love that could never be. But why did she leave this diary here?" Jake asked, looking around the room as if searching for answers in the walls. "Why didn't she take it with her?" "Maybe she wanted her story to be known," I suggested. "Or perhaps she was somehow trapped in this place, as if she couldn't leave her memories behind." "That's kind of creepy, isn't it?" Lily commented, a shiver running down her spine. "As if Margaret is still here, in some way." Slowly, I opened the diary again, and the next page made me stop. The handwriting was more hurried, almost desperate. "I must find a way to escape, they cannot know. Love is a prison, and pain is the only company I have left." "Dude, this is so intense," Jake said, his expression now more serious. She was clearly very distressed. "This isn't just a love story, it's a story of pain. What if the room, the house, is somehow connected to this?" I suggested, feeling a chill in my stomach. "Maybe she's trapped here because she couldn't free herself from her pain." "That's crazy," Lily replied, looking around cautiously. "But at the same time, it makes sense. It's as if the house is keeping her secrets and emotions." As we talked, the whispering I had heard before returned, stronger this time, as if the walls were trying to communicate. "What is that?" I asked, looking at my siblings. "I'm starting to get scared," Jake admitted, his gaze fixed on a dark corner of the room. "We should get out of here." "Not yet," I said, my determination growing. "We need to understand this. We need to know what really happened to Margaret." "And what if we can't?" Lily asked, a shadow of worry on her face. "What if this leads us to a place we can't come back from? We need to be brave. This is more than just an old house, it's someone's story that needs to be told," I replied. And with that, I focused back on the diary, determined to uncover every detail those pages had to offer. We continued reading, and with each new passage, the weight of Margaret's story seemed to envelop us more and more. Her fears, her hopes, her losses, all of it was there, imbued in those yellowed pages. And as we delved deeper, I knew there was something more. Something that was yet to come, something that would connect us to her in ways we couldn't imagine. The whispers grew stronger, almost as if we were being watched. The room was alive, and we were merely intruders, digging into secrets we perhaps shouldn't have unearthed. But there was a force that bound us there, a calling we could not ignore. "Emily," Jake called, breaking my trance. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we need to uncover the truth. We need to understand what happened to Margaret, and maybe even help her," I replied, my voice filled with renewed determination. "And what if that's dangerous?" Jake pressed, his concern evident. Sometimes, we have to take risks to find the truth, I said, looking at my hands resting on the diary. And I can't do this alone. We're family, and we must face this together. Lily looked at me, and I saw the spark of courage in her eyes. You're right. If something's wrong here, we should find out what it is. Even if it means confronting our fears. With a nod, Jake agreed. Then let's do it. Let's find out who Margaret was and what really happened to her. And so, we decided to continue reading, each of us feeling that Margaret's story was intertwining with ours. What else could this house reveal to us? The answer lay in the pages we had yet to read, and with every word, we drew closer to a mystery that defied time and space. The nightmares began to seep into our lives in ways I had never imagined. The first night I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat and with my heart racing, was just the beginning. It was as if the house, with its old walls and musty smell, had a life of its own, absorbing our fears and transforming them into terrifying visions that manifested while we slept. Jake, did you have that dream too? I asked my brother as we sat at the table for breakfast. He had deep circles under his eyes, and the lost look on his face spoke volumes about sleepless nights. Yeah. It was the same thing again, he replied, his eyes fixed on his coffee cup as if it were the only thing keeping him anchored to reality. The woman, she was there again, with that sad look. And the child. I can't make sense of it. Our new home had a history, one that felt more like a nightmare than a residence. And the deeper we delved into the renovations, the more the echoes of the past became present. The diary Emily found, the words of Margaret, the former owner, lingered in our minds like a persistent shadow. I couldn't stop thinking about the forbidden love she described, the pains she endured. The nights turned into a battlefield where we fought against our own demons and the demons the house seemed to feed on. That night, after another long day of work in the house, I decided I could no longer ignore what was happening. The heavy atmosphere wrapped around me like a shroud, and I needed to understand. I was sitting in my room, looking out the window, when a strange sensation took hold of me. Something was calling me from the secret room. I slowly stood up and made my way there, my heart racing. When I entered the room, the atmosphere felt different. The air seemed denser, and a chill ran down my spine. I approached the window, the same one Jake had mentioned, and the distorted landscape beyond the glass left me speechless. It was a grotesque sight, a world that seemed to writhe in pain and despair. I could feel something stronger than curiosity. It was as if the window was trying to draw me in, pulling me toward that dark place. "Hey, Jake." I called, but my voice sounded strange, echoing like it was in a tunnel. "You have to see this." He appeared in the doorway, a skeptical look on his face. "What are you doing in here again? Isn't it better to stay away from this room? But can't you see? Look at this window." I gestured, almost desperately. He stepped closer, and his face changed, a mix of fear and fascination taking over his features. I don't know what this is," he murmured, his eyes locked on the distorted landscape. "It's like it's alive." "Exactly," I agreed. "And it feels like it's calling us." That night, I couldn't sleep. I closed my eyes, but the images of the distorted landscape danced in my mind. #### strange figures emerged from nowhere, shadows writhing under a dim light. And then, in that darkness, a woman appeared. It was Margaret. I recognized her immediately, even without having seen her face before. Her expression was one of pain and yearning, and I could feel the weight of her sorrow. "Help me," she whispered, her voice a soft echo resonating in my mind. "Help me find peace." I woke up, breathing heavily, and sat up in bed. The sun was starting to rise, and morning light filtered through the curtains. I went to the living room, where I found Jake and Emily speaking in hushed tones. "You felt it too, didn't you?" I asked, and they turned to me, surprised. "Felt what?" Jake questioned, a look of confusion on his face. "The presence. Margaret. She's asking for help, I said, trying to articulate the thoughts swirling in my head. Are you serious? Emily asked, concern etched on her face. I heard whispers last night. They seemed to come from inside the walls. I did too. And it was her name I heard, Jake added, his voice now more serious. She's trapped here, and we need to do something. The idea that Margaret was actually trying to communicate with us was unbearable, but at the same time, there was an inexplicable connection that drew me into her story. We need to find out more about her. The diary you found, Emily. We should read it together, I suggested. Great idea, Emily agreed, determination shining in her eyes. Maybe we can understand what happened to her and, who knows, help her find peace. We gathered in the living room, the diary open before us. However, as we began to read, something was missing. Some pages were torn out, as if the words that had once been written had been ripped from their essence. Frustration began to grow within me. Why would someone do this? I murmured, running my fingers over the damaged pages. These pages could hold answers. Maybe Margaret herself tried to hide something, Jake suggested, his gaze distant. Something that could have been very painful for her. Or maybe someone wanted her story forgotten, Emily added, her voice low. There was a growing tension among us, as if the house was watching, waiting to see what our next move would be. That night, the nightmares intensified. I couldn't escape the vision of Margaret, trapped between two worlds, her despair intertwining with my own pain. It was as if her experiences were becoming mine, and I felt each beat of her broken heart. Jake, you need to help me, I whispered, trying to push away the disturbing images. We need to understand what happened to her. I don't know, David, he replied, his voice tense. I'm starting to think maybe we should just leave this house. It doesn't feel right. You can't just run away, I protested. If we leave, who will help Margaret? She needs us. Weeks went by, and the secret room became a place of both attraction and repulsion. I couldn't avoid the window, something inside me wanted to explore more, to discover what lay beyond that glass. Lily's drawings, with their disturbing depictions of the landscape, began to haunt me as well. It was as if she was capturing something beyond comprehension. You shouldn't spend so much time here, she told me one night, a worried expression on her face. The window, something's not right with it. I know, but I feel it's important. I feel connected to all of this, I replied, trying to explain the urgency consuming me. Connected? David, this isn't a healthy connection. Lily insisted, her voice full of emotion. You're losing yourself. You can't let this consume you. But I couldn't. It was as if an invisible force was pulling me, and even when I tried to resist, the desire to know more about Margaret and her story grew stronger. That night, while everyone was asleep, I returned to the room. The darkness felt thicker, and the air seemed to vibrate with strange energy. The window called to me, and I couldn't resist. As I approached, something within me broke. The world beyond the glass seemed to pulse, and a wave of despair washed over me. Margaret! I shouted, not knowing if she could hear me. If you're there, help me understand. What happened to you? Her presence manifested intensely. I could feel her pain, her lost love, and the agony of a past that still bound her. And then, in a moment of clarity, I realized that the key to freeing her might lie in understanding her story. I won't leave you here, I promise, I murmured, determination renewed in my heart. Let's figure this out together. Thus, the struggle for Margaret's freedom became more than just a quest, it was a journey intertwined with my own story and the story of my family. The sunlight poured through the living room window, illuminating the dust dancing in the air. I watched David with a mix of admiration and concern as he dedicated himself to renovating the old Thompson house. There was something captivating about his determination, but the strange atmosphere surrounding us left me uneasy. The secret room that Jake and Lily had found felt like more than just an abandoned space, it was as if it were alive, watching us. "Look at this, Em," David exclaimed, pulling up a floorboard. The sound of the hammer echoed through the space, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "This wood can be restored. Imagine how it will look when everything is finished." "David, aren't you listening to what the kid said?" I approached him, trying to stay calm. "They're having nightmares, and I am too. That room, there's something wrong with it." He stopped and looked at me, skepticism etched on his face. "They're just kids, Emily. They're just adjusting to the change. That happens. But it's not just that. I feel a strange energy. Something from the past." The sentence caught in my throat. How could I explain the feeling that the house was watching us? "Please, just listen to me. I understand you're worried, but we need to do this. This house has potential, and I want our children to grow up here, with good memories. We can't let unfounded fears stop us from restoring it." He returned to his work as if my concern carried no weight. I took a deep breath, trying not to let frustration overwhelm me. David had always been like this, so focused on his goals that he often ignored the warning signs around him. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you when things start getting weird." As if the house were responding to our exchange, a cold breeze swept through the room, causing the door to the secret room to close slowly. I glanced at the spot where Jake and Lily had discovered the hidden panel, my heart racing. Something was not right, and I felt the room manifesting in some way. The day passed, and night fell with a cloak of darkness that seemed to seep into the house. We all gathered for dinner, but the conversation was superficial, as if an invisible weight rested upon us. Jake was quiet, his eyes lost somewhere far away. Lily, on the other hand, was feverishly drawing in her notebook, but I couldn't see what it was. "Kids, what happened to you today?" I asked, trying to break the ice. "You seemed different since you found that room." "It's just the house, Mom. It's just an old house," Jake replied, but his voice lacked the conviction he tried to convey. "It's nothing. Jake, you can tell me how you're feeling. We're all in this together." I encouraged him to open up. I just don't like the secret room." "I don't like it," he finally admitted, his voice trembling. "I feel like it's calling to me, but I don't know where." Lily looked at him, wide-eyed. "I feel it too, Jake. It's like something wants to show us something, but it's scary." She flipped the page in her notebook, revealing a distorted image of the landscape she had seen through the window of the room. It was disturbing, as if reflecting a nightmare. "I don't want you to go back there," I said, my voice firm. "That room isn't a safe place. ####, we need to focus on restoring the rest of the house, without getting involved with what's in there." David, who had not intervened until then, looked at us, a frown appearing on his face. "I can't just ignore part of the house. If there's a space there, it needs to be restored. If not, there will always be a hole in the house." "But David, what you don't understand is that it's not just a room. It's as if something is trapped there, and it's affecting all of us." I confronted him, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Em, you're being irrational. We're here to build a new life, not to let the fears of the past control us. We need to be strong and face this together." I wanted to scream, but I knew that wouldn't help. What I really wanted was for him to understand that the house wasn't just a project to finish, it was a living entity, and it was showing us that something much deeper was going on. After dinner, while the kids went upstairs, I sat in the living room, my mind racing with thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was trying to communicate with us, and the secret room was the epicenter of that communication. The energy emanating from it was palpable, and I was convinced that something terrible had happened there. I got up and decided to take one last look at the room. As I approached the door, a cold breeze wrapped around me, almost paralyzing me. The room was covered in dust and shadows, a place that seemed to have been forgotten by time. Emily. David's voice echoed behind me. What are you doing? Just looking. We need to understand this room before we restore it. We need to know what happened here. You're letting yourself get carried away by things that aren't real. It's just a room. He approached me, and I could see the concern in his eyes. And what if it's not? What if there's something we need to know? Something that could help us understand the house's history. I looked at him, hoping he would see the logic in my words. He hesitated for a moment, but then shook his head. Fine, but don't spend too much time here. I still think we're wasting time in this place. With that, he stepped away, and I entered the room. The air was heavy, like a fog that seemed to absorb the light. I looked around and saw the furniture covered in white sheets, like ghosts of the past. A part of me wanted to touch one of them, but the fear of discovering what might be hidden paralyzed me. Then I heard it. Whispers. They were soft, almost as if the walls were speaking. Margaret. The name echoed in the space, and a wave of cold swept through my body. The room was alive, and something, or someone, was calling. Who's there? I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. What do you want? The whispers grew louder, and I realized I wasn't alone. There was a presence there, something longing to be heard. My eyes locked onto an old drawer in one of the tables. Something inside it seemed to shine, and curiosity compelled me to move closer. With some effort, I pulled the drawer out. The creaking sound echoed in the silent room. Inside, I found a diary. The cover was worn, but the pages were intact, as if someone had taken great care of it. My hands trembled with anticipation as I opened it. The smell of aged paper filled my nose, and I began to read. My dear lover, last night was magical, but fear still consumes me. No one can know about us. The handwriting was tragically beautiful, and the story began to unfold before my eyes. The diary belonged to Margaret, the former owner of the house. As I read, the connection between us seemed to deepen. Margaret. I murmured, the name escaping me like a whisper. The room seemed to stir around me, as if the walls were breathing with the life of her story. I needed to know more. The pain and passion that permeated those pages were tangible, and I felt she was calling to me. Emily. David's voice broke my trance. He appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide. What did you find? It's Margaret's diary. It's her story, and she was in love with someone she couldn't have. The room was a place for secret meetings. I was excited, but David's expression quickly turned to disinterest. This doesn't change anything. It's just an old diary. We need to focus on what we can do with the house now. He crossed his arms, frustration evident on his face. But I couldn't let it go. David, you don't understand. There's something deeper here. She lost a child, and that trapped her in this place. We need to help. Emily, please. Let's leave this behind and just restore the house. We can't let ourselves be. The atmosphere of the house was heavy with a weight I couldn't ignore. Ever since we found that secret room, something inside me began to change. The curiosity that initially drove me now transformed into a growing unease, as if I were sinking into a mystery I couldn't decipher. The room felt alive, pulsing with an energy I didn't understand, and I knew I had to uncover what was happening. That night, while the others were caught up in their own things, I decided to return to the room. The light from the lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls as I approached the hidden panel. The door creaked open, and the smell of mold and dust greeted me like a cold embrace. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity won over fear, and I stepped inside. Within, the darkness seemed to swallow the light. With a gentle touch, I turned on my phone's flashlight and illuminated the furniture covered in white sheets. It felt as if I were invading someone's home, someone who had left everything behind. Each step echoed, and the silence was deafening. What was I really hoping to find there? Something told me I was about to discover more than just dusty objects. As I rummaged through the drawers, I found an old diary, its leather cover worn, hidden in one of the tables. My heart raced. The diary seemed to tell a story yearning to be heard. Carefully, I opened one of the pages and began to read aloud, as if this would bring the former owner back to life. "Dear James," I began, the delicate and anguished handwriting dancing before my eyes. "If you're reading this, perhaps I've found the courage to finally open up. What I feel for you is not just a fleeting fancy, it is a flame that burns within me, even when society tells us we cannot be." "Margaret," I whispered, her name reverberating in the room like an echo. The weight of her words enveloped me, and I felt an inexplicable connection to the woman who had written those lines. As I continued, I realized her words were filled with pain and forbidden love. She spoke of secret meetings in the room, of stolen moments in the shadows. Her story captivated me, and I couldn't help but let my emotions spill over. "Emily, are you okay?" Jake's voice brought me back to reality. He had entered the room, concern etched on his face. "What are you doing here alone?" "Jake, you need to hear this," I replied, still absorbed in my reading. "Margaret, she had a forbidden love. She felt trapped, just like we do now." I looked at him, hoping he would grasp the seriousness of the situation. "This is just an old story," Jake said, shaking his head. "We can't let ourselves get wrapped up in this. We need to leave this room. It's not just a story. It's her life. She lost a child, Jake. That changed everything for her." The words escaped me with an urgency I couldn't control. "She's trapped between two worlds, and maybe, just maybe, we can help her." "You're talking as if Margaret is here right now," Jake replied, his voice laden with skepticism. "We need to focus on us, on our family." "But she's part of our story now," I insisted. "We need to understand what happened. This could help us get out of this situation." Jake seemed to hesitate, but the look in his eyes told me he was beginning to see the gravity of what we faced. "Have you read more?" he asked, curiosity starting to outweigh doubt. "Yes," I replied, flipping through the pages until I found a part where Margaret spoke of her pain and loss. She wrote a letter that she never finished. ####. She was getting ready to meet James, but something happened. Something that kept her trapped here. The air around us seemed to grow heavier as I spoke, as if the room itself was listening. "So, what can we do?" Jake asked, his tone now more serious. "How can we help Margaret?" "We need to find out what happened to her son," I said, the idea starting to take shape in my mind. "If we can understand her loss, maybe we can free her. And who knows, it might free us too." "Okay, let's do this," Jake agreed, though concern still lingered in his eyes. He stepped closer to me, and together we decided we needed to tell the family what we had discovered. It was time to unite forces. That night, while everyone gathered in the living room, Jake and I shared the findings we had made. I remember looking at my mother, Emily, and seeing the mix of worry and interest reflected in her eyes. "Margaret had a life full of secrets," I said, trying to capture everyone's attention. "She loved someone she couldn't have and lost so much in the process. That's sad, but what does that have to do with us?" David asked, his skeptical tone echoing off the old house walls. "We need to focus on the renovation, not stories from the past." "Because the room is becoming increasingly strange," Jake interjected. "It doesn't want us to ignore it. The whispers are growing louder, and I feel like it's calling us." He looked at me, and I sensed he was beginning to believe there was something deeper at play. "The whispers?" David repeated, curiosity starting to emerge in his voice. "What do you mean by that?" "I heard them, Dad," I said, holding Jake's hand. "Margaret is trapped, and we need to understand why. The room, the energy, it's as if she's trying to tell us something." The silence in the room was palpable, and I knew the tension was rising. If Margaret is truly trying to communicate, we need to pay attention, Emily said, her voice soft but filled with determination. Maybe what happened to her, what she lost, connects with what we're going through now. So, what do we do? David asked, now clearly intrigued. How can we help this woman who lived so long ago? Margaret left an unfinished letter. We need to find it and finish what she started, I suggested, feeling adrenaline coursing through my veins. If we can understand her pain, maybe we can free her and, in doing so, free ourselves too. The tension in the room heightened, and everyone fell silent, reflecting on the words we had just shared. The sense of urgency grew, and I knew we were facing something bigger than all of us. David finally nodded. Let's look for that letter, he said, his voice firm. Let's uncover the truth and try to help Margaret. But we need to be careful. There's something very wrong with this room. Determination spread among us, and as the night wore on, we began to plan our next steps. What Margaret had lived through was not just a story from the past, it was an echo that still reverberated through the walls of that house, and we were determined to discover how it related to our lives. As we prepared to face what lay ahead, an unsettling feeling began to settle in my chest. The shadows of the room seemed to shift, and the whispers, once soft, were now growing louder and more insistent, as if trying to warn us of the dangers still to come. The darkness of the night enveloped the Thompson house like a heavy, suffocating cloak. I could no longer ignore the oppressive feeling that seemed to grow with each passing day. The nightmares had become frequent and vivid, as if I were being pulled into another reality every time I closed my eyes. On this particular night, I lay in bed, the silence broken only by the distant sound of rain tapping against the window, when the vision began to form. It was as if I were being transported to the past, to Margaret's life. I saw her figure, pale and sad, dressed in a flowing period dress. She stood in an environment that felt familiar yet strange, as if the house itself were a shadow of what it once was. I could hear the echo of her laughter, but it was distorted, mingled with the sound of her weeping. It was a battle between joy and pain, and I was caught between two worlds. The image grew clearer, and suddenly, I found myself facing Margaret, who stood in a flower-filled garden. The flowers were vibrant, but the color palette seemed faded, as if the brilliance of life were draining away. She was gazing into the distance, her eyes filled with yearning. I couldn't understand what was happening, it was as if I were a spectator, unable to interact. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice soft like a whisper but laden with despair. "You shouldn't be here. You don't belong in this place." I don't know," I replied, my voice trembling. "I'm Emily, from the Thompson family. I'm trying to understand what happened to you." Margaret turned slowly, and the expression on her face was a mixture of pain and hope. "You must leave. This house is not a home, it is a prison. I lost everything because of it." I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. "What happened to you, Margaret? What did you lose?" She looked down, and the expression on her face transformed into a portrait of suffering. "I lost love, I lost my son, and now I'm trapped between two worlds. I don't know how to escape." Her words echoed in my mind, and I found myself back in the secret room, surrounded by dusty furniture and a window showing that distorted landscape. The air was heavy and charged with a strange energy, as if the room itself were alive and aware of our presence. I knew I needed to understand more about what she had gone through, and the idea consumed me, pulling me closer to the truth. The next morning, I woke with a heavy head and a racing heart. I glanced at the clock, it was almost noon. I had overslept, but the dreams were still fresh in my mind. I got out of bed and headed to the living room where the family was gathered, discussing the renovation of the house. "Emily, are you okay?" Jake asked, concern etched on his face. "You seemed distant last night." "I had a strange dream," I replied. "It was about Margaret. She was sad, trapped somewhere between life and death." "That's odd," Lily said, frowning. Maybe it's just the stress of the move. This house has a weird energy. David, who was focused on a restoration project, looked at me and shook his head. We should concentrate on bringing the house back to life, not getting stuck in the past. What happened to the former owner isn't our responsibility. But it is. I insisted, frustration boiling within me. She's trapped here, and you don't understand what that means. The room, it's like a black hole. It's sucking the life out of all of us. Emily, don't be dramatic, David replied, averting his gaze. We need to finish this renovation. That's how we'll make this house work again. Those words sent my heart racing. His words echoed in my mind, make this house work again. It was as if he wasn't hearing any of what we were saying. The truth was that the house was working, but not in the way he imagined. The strange energy was growing, and I felt that something terrible was about to happen. In the days that followed, the visions of Margaret intensified. I saw flashes of her life, moments when she appeared happy, surrounded by flowers and smiles, but soon that transformed into nightmares, filled with screams and tears. It was as if I were living two realities at once, and each time I closed my eyes, the line between the worlds grew thinner. On one of the darkest nights, while everyone was asleep, I got out of bed. Something inside me pulled me toward the secret room, as if the walls were whispering my name. I went there, and the air was heavy, electrically charged. The window showed a landscape that seemed to pulse, as if the room itself were breathing. Margaret? I called, my voice echoing in the dim light. Are you here? Silence. ####. Then, a cold breeze swept past me, and I felt her presence. You shouldn't be here, Emily, she whispered. But you need to understand. You're the only one who can help me. I looked out the window, and the distorted view began to clear. I want to help, but how? Complete the letter I never could finish, she said, her voice growing more intense. Only then will I be able to find peace. Only then can I be free. A shiver ran down my spine. The letter. The one I had seen in the diary. But where is the letter? What do I need to write? You'll know when the time comes, Margaret replied, her image starting to fade. But you must hurry. Time is running out. Before I could respond, the vision dissolved, and I found myself back in the living room, breathless and confused. The weight of responsibility rested on my shoulders. I needed to unravel what was happening, but with each passing day, the situation in the house grew more suffocating. Jake was isolating himself, more distant than ever. He wouldn't listen to me, and his obsession with the window seemed to intensify. Lily, on the other hand, was becoming increasingly absorbed in her disturbing drawings, as if she were trying to capture the essence of what surrounded us. One night, while trying to sleep, I heard a noise coming from Jake's room. I quickly got up and went to his door, knocking softly. Jake? Are you okay? I am, he replied, but his voice sounded empty. I just can't stop thinking about the window. You shouldn't be so close to it. It's dangerous, I said, worried. The room is changing us all. You need to step back. He didn't respond. Instead, the door slowly creaked open, and Jake stepped out, his eyes glazed over. I can't, Emily. Something is calling me. I feel like there's something on the other side I need to discover. But what if it's not safe? I pleaded. We can't let this consume us. We need to come together and get out of this. He merely shook his head, as if he were in a trance. I can't. I need to know what's there. A wave of despair washed over me. Jake, please. You're isolating yourself. This isn't you. He looked at me, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of lucidity in his eyes. I just want to understand what happened to Margaret. What happened to the house? I feel like something is about to change. And in that moment, I realized that the room wasn't just affecting Jake, it was affecting all of us, slowly consuming our wills and desires. I needed to find a way to free us before it was too late. But at the same time, Margaret was calling me, and I knew that the truth was within our reach, even if it meant facing our deepest fears. The visions of Margaret continued to haunt my mind, and the line between reality and dream grew increasingly blurred. I needed to uncover what was happening, and the only way was to confront the room again and unravel the mysteries it held. But I didn't know if I was ready for what I might find. The tension in the Thompson house was at its peak. After weeks of renovations and unsettling discoveries, the secret room had become a true mystery for us. The atmosphere was heavy, as if the house itself were watching us, and what had once been merely a renovation had transformed into a battle against forces we barely understood. "We need to talk about this," I said, trying to gather everyone in the living room. The look on each of their faces reflected a mix of exhaustion and fear. Jake was sitting on the couch, staring at the floor. Lily, standing beside me, seemed nervous, fidgeting with her hands. David, on the other hand, was more concerned about the walls needing restoration than the signs we were all perceiving. "Emily, this is just your imagination," he replied, shaking his head dismissively. "The room is nothing more than an old, forgotten space. Let's restore it, and everything will be fine." "But Dad, you don't understand. Those whispers, the visions, it's not normal." I spoke fervently, trying to penetrate his stubbornness. "Margaret is calling us, and we can't ignore this." "Margaret? Are you still on that kick?" Jake lifted his head, his gaze distant as if he were lost in his own thoughts. "I don't think this is leading us anywhere. We need to focus on the renovation." I could feel my frustration building inside me, but there was also an underlying worry. The room wasn't just a physical space, it was a portal to something much deeper and darker. We can't simply ignore what's happening. The room, it has a will of its own. At that moment, a soft whisper swept through the air, causing the hair on the back of my neck to stand up. I looked around, but no one else seemed to have heard. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. "Hear what?" David asked, his patience wearing thin. "That whisper," I insisted. "I'm sure something is wrong. We need to learn more about Margaret's story." "But how?" Lily interjected, her voice trembling. "The diary you found has some pages missing. What more can we do?" "I don't know," I replied, feeling my frustration morph into desperation. "But we need to come together and uncover the truth. Margaret is trying to communicate with us, and we can't just let this happen." Determined to confront what was going on, we began discussing strategies. Jake suggested we explore the secret room further, but David still seemed reluctant. "We can clean the furniture, maybe we'll find more clues," he said, but his tone was more that of a worried father than someone truly convinced. "Okay, let's do that," I agreed. The idea of entering that room again made me nervous, but I felt it was the only way to understand what was happening. "Let's meet there in an hour. We need to be together." The time I spent waiting felt like an eternity. When we finally entered the room, the atmosphere was heavy. The dim light from the distorted window illuminated the dust-covered furniture, and the feeling of being watched was almost unbearable. I looked at my siblings and my father, and I saw the same fear reflected in their faces. "Let's search for more clues," Jake said, breaking the silence. "Who knows, we might find something that explains what happened here." We began rummaging through the furniture, lifting dust covers and opening drawers. I remembered the unfinished letter I had found, and the image of Margaret haunted me as I tried to imagine her life. "If she was here, there must be something that tells us why she got stuck," I murmured, lost in thought. "Look at this," Lily exclaimed, pulling a box from under a table. "What do you think is in here?" The box was filled with old objects, a brooch, some yellowed letters, and even a small porcelain doll with one eye broken. It was as if each item told a part of Margaret's story. "These objects don't seem to be here by accident," I said, looking at each of them. Maybe they hold some significance. Let's see the letters, Jake suggested, holding one in his hand. If they're related to her, they might give us a clue about what happened. As he began to read, the silence in the room deepened. I felt something was changing, a pulsating energy that seemed to emanate from the walls. The whisper I had heard earlier started to grow louder, as if it were calling out to us. "Jake, are you hearing this?" I asked, looking at him. "Yeah, it's strange," he replied hesitantly. "But I can't understand what it's saying." The tension escalated, and David, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "Let's stay calm. It could just be our imagination. We need to continue our research and not let this intimidate us." "But Dad, it's not just that," I said, almost pleading. "The room is alive, and I feel like it wants us to discover something. We need to connect the dots." Jake, still holding the letter, looked at me with determination. "If Margaret was here, then we need to understand what she was going through. This could be the key to everything." As Jake continued to read, I stepped closer to the distorted window, feeling an invisible force pulling me. "This window, there's something wrong with it," I murmured to myself. ####. What I saw from the outside was a landscape of shadows and distorted shapes, as if reality itself were disintegrating. "Emily, come see this," Lily called, interrupting my thoughts. "Look, there are more letters here." I ran over to her, and we found a series of torn letters, some almost illegible. "Margaret was writing to someone," I said, examining the words I could decipher. "She was in love with someone she couldn't have." "That explains the forbidden love you mentioned earlier," Jake commented, and I noticed the look of sadness on his face. "But why is she trapped here?" The whisper intensified again, almost as if it were answering our question. It was a sound that penetrated our ears, and the energy in the room seemed to increase with each passing moment. "We're getting closer to something," I said, feeling my hands tremble with anxiety. "We need to figure out how to help her." "But how?" David asked, now clearly more engaged. "What do you suggest we do?" "We need to find the letter she couldn't finish," I said, my mind racing with the idea. "If she was writing about her love, maybe that's what keeps her here. If we can complete the letter, perhaps we can set her free." "And what if it's not enough?" Jake asked, his voice low. "What if it just makes things worse?" "We have to try," I said, determined. "We can't let her story end like this. Margaret deserves peace." So, with renewed determination, we began to search for more clues in the room. But as we continued, I noticed that something was changing. The room seemed to be closing in around us, and the strange energy was growing stronger. The whisper was now almost deafening, and the feeling of being watched was oppressive. "Emily, are you okay?" Lily asked, looking at me with concern. I don't know," I replied, feeling a wave of despair wash over me. "I think we're getting close to something dangerous." And then, amid all that chaos, one of the windows shattered, sending glass flying and revealing a vortex of light and shadows. The sound of the glass breaking echoed through the room, and an intense cold enveloped us. What was about to happen was beyond our comprehension, and the room now felt alive, reacting to our presence. "We need to get out." I screamed, but panic spread across each of their faces. The room was transforming into a place we couldn't control, and what Margaret truly represented was about to be revealed. The atmosphere in the house had become oppressive, as if the air was thick with a dense energy that made each breath a struggle. I could feel the tension pulsating around us, like a thread about to snap. What had once been a promising home, filled with dreams and hopes, now felt more like a trap, and the secret room seemed like a dark heart beating in the shadows. "We need to do something," I said to Jake and Lily, who were sitting on the sofa, their faces pale and eyes lost. "We can't just ignore this. The room, something is wrong with it." Jake looked at me, his blue eyes filled with a mix of fear and despair. "But what can we do, Emily?" Dad doesn't believe in any of this. He thinks we're exaggerating. I know, I replied, feeling frustration rise within me. But I can't stop thinking about Margaret. There's something there she wants us to discover. We need to go back into the room. Lily, who had been silent until then, looked at me with a mix of determination and hesitation. I don't know, Em. The last time we were in there, it was terrifying. That window, just thinking about it gives me chills. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my courage. I feel we have to do this. If Margaret is trapped there, maybe we can help her. We need to understand what happened, what kept her trapped. We can't let the house win. The two exchanged glances, and for a moment, I thought they might give in. But the memories of the nightmares that haunted us in recent days were still fresh in their minds. The room, with its whispers and disturbing visions, was a place we all feared. However, the need to face our fears was greater than any dread we felt. "Let's go together, then," Jake finally said, determination firming in his voice. "If we're going, we have to go as a family. We can't separate." I nodded, and together we decided that that night, we would make a new expedition to the room. With our hearts racing, we climbed the stairs, each step echoing in the empty house as a reminder of what was to come. When we reached the door of the room, the atmosphere seemed to shift. The dim light from the hallway extinguished as we approached, and the air grew even heavier. The door opened slowly, as if inviting us in, and I hesitated for a moment, feeling a chill run down my spine. "Are you ready, Em?" Lily asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Yes," I responded, trying to sound more confident than I actually felt. "Let's uncover the truth." We entered the room, and the darkness seemed to swallow us. The shadows danced on the walls, and the dust-covered furniture seemed to watch us with invisible eyes. The window, with its distorted and dark landscape, was to our left, and the familiar whisper began to echo again, like a hypnotic song calling to us. "Listen," I said, almost in a murmur. "Are you hearing this too?" Jake nodded slowly. "Yes, it seems to be coming from the walls. It's as if something is trying to tell us something." Lily moved closer to the window, her eyes fixed on the landscape unfolding outside the glass. "It's so strange. I can see shapes, but they're not clear. It's like something is hiding there." "Lily, don't get too close," I said, concern taking over me. "Remember what happened last time you looked at it? You felt sick." She hesitated, but curiosity seemed to have more power over her. "But what if I see something that can help us?" Before I could protest, she placed her hand on the glass, and instantly, a wave of energy coursed through the room. I felt as if an electric shock ran through my body, and Jake and I exchanged worried glances. "Lily, wait!" Jake shouted. But it was too late. The window began to glow, an intense light seeming to emanate from the room itself. The whispers rose in volume, turning into a cacophony of voices echoing in our minds. "Margaret," I whispered, feeling her presence closer than ever. "What do you want from us?" It was then that a sudden vision struck me. I saw flashes of Margaret's life, moments of happiness and pain, as if I were watching a movie in fast forward. There was an image of her running through the garden of the house, laughing, and soon after, the same woman, alone, with tears in her eyes. "She's trapped here, because of her pain," I said, the words escaping my lips uncontrollably. "She needs help." "But how can we help?" Jake asked, his voice tense. "What do we do?" The window was now pulsating, and I couldn't resist. "I need to go there. I need to understand. If Margaret is really here, maybe I can find her." "Emily, no!" Jake shouted, but I was already moving toward the window. The light seemed to call me, and before I realized it, I was crossing the space between us and the vision. As I passed through the light, I was enveloped in a feeling of freedom and weight at the same time. It was as if I were floating between worlds, and then, suddenly, I was pulled into Margaret's vision. The landscape around me changed. I was in the same garden I had seen before, but now it was vibrant and full of life. Colorful flowers bloomed around me, and the sky was a deep blue. I could feel the gentle breeze on my face, and for a moment, the feeling of pain and despair vanished. But soon, the tranquility faded, and a shadow began to form in front of me. The figure of Margaret appeared, her expression a mix of joy and sadness. She looked at me with eyes full of pain, and I knew that the connection between us was deeper than I could imagine. "You came," she said, her voice soft but laden with emotion. "You are the only one who can help me." "Margaret," I began, but the words failed me. The beauty around us began to fade, and I realized that her pain was linked to that distorted landscape I had seen in the room. Hashtag, I am trapped between two worlds, she confessed, the sadness in her voice resonating in my chest. "I can't find peace, my story isn't finished." "But what happened?" I asked, feeling the urgency to understand her pain. "How did you get stuck here?" She hesitated, and a tear rolled down her cheek. "I lost everything, my love, my child. And now, I can't move on. I need you to help me complete what I couldn't." The reality started to distort again, and I realized that time was running out. "I will help you, I promise. But first, we need to understand what really happened." The shadow around me grew, and I knew I had to return to the room. "I will come back. I will tell your story. Don't give up on me, Margaret." I felt a strong pull, and in an instant, I was thrown back into the room. The shock was intense, and I fell to my knees, gasping. Jake and Lily were by my side, their expressions a mix of relief and concern. "Emily, you were gone for so long. What happened?" Jake asked, helping me up. "Margaret, she needs help," I said, my voice trembling. "She's trapped, and her pain, we need to free her. We have to find out what happened to her." Lily glanced at the window, which now seemed calmer, but still carried an unsettling energy. "How are we going to do this, Em? What can we do? We need to find what's missing in the diary. I feel like there's more to her story, something that connects us to all of this. If we can complete what she couldn't, maybe we can free her." The three of us exchanged glances, and determination began to form in our hearts. The room still pulsed with Margaret's energy, and we knew the battle was just beginning. The truth was waiting for us, and we were ready to face it together. The room was enveloped in a dense gloom, and I felt as if the walls were breathing around me. The smell of mildew and old wood was almost unbearable, but there was something else there, an aroma of sadness that seemed to penetrate every fiber of my being. I knew I had to go back. Margaret's call was strong, as if she were waiting for me, ready to reveal the secrets that kept her trapped between worlds. With my heart racing, I stepped through the ajar door of the secret room. The atmosphere seemed to pulse, and the light escaping through the cracks of the distorted windows created dancing shadows on the floor. Each step I took led me deeper into her story, and I couldn't turn back now. "Margaret?" I called, my voice echoing against the walls. "Are you here?" A soft whisper responded, reverberating off the walls like an ancient melody. Yes, it was as if the echo of her voice was intertwined with the lament of the wind that flowed through the broken window. "You came." I felt a shiver run down my spine. I want to help you." "What happened? Why are you trapped here?" A figure began to materialize before me. She was a woman with dark hair and pale skin, her flowing dress seemed to float as if there were no gravity around her. "I am trapped between two worlds, Emily. My love, my child, everything was taken from me. I can't leave." Her eyes were filled with pain, and I could feel the anguish pulsing in the room. "Margaret, what happened to your child?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She closed her eyes, and a tear rolled down her cheek. He was taken from me. A mistake, a decision, and I could never forgive myself. The room was our refuge, our secret place, but now it has become my prison. I feel your pain. You don't have to be alone here. I want to understand. I want to help you break free. The words flowed from me with urgency. What should I do? Margaret looked at me with a mix of hope and despair. You need to know the truth. The truth about the love that could never blossom and the loss that consumed me. My lover, he meant everything to me, but the world would not accept our love. We were forced to hide, and when our child was born, everything fell apart. Tell me what happened. I am here. I wanted her to feel safe, to share her burden. She began to narrate her story, her words dancing in the air like a gentle breeze. I met Thomas at a party in the countryside, far from the judgmental eyes of our society. He was kind, funny, and had a smile that lit up my days. We fell madly in love, but we knew our love was forbidden. Margaret paused, and I could see the pain on her face. When I found out I was pregnant, the joy quickly turned into terror. I knew I couldn't tell anyone. Society would never accept a child born out of wedlock. So, we decided to run away, to plan a new life, but everything went wrong. The day I gave birth to my child was the happiest yet most tragic day of my life. And what happened next? I asked, feeling the tension rise. Margaret took a deep breath, as if remembering a horrific moment. That night, while I slept, Thomas went out to seek help. He promised he would return, but he never came back. Days passed, and I was alone, with a newborn in my arms and the weight of the world on my shoulders. Despair took over me, and the pain turned into madness. You weren't alone, you had your child. Saying that felt like a comfort, but I knew her pain went deeper than I could comprehend. I lost him. He fell ill, and I couldn't save him. The day he left, a part of me went with him. The room became my refuge, but now it is a prison. I can't leave this place because it is filled with memories, and I am trapped in the pain. Her eyes were fixed on me, and I could feel her sadness as if it were my own. Margaret, you need to set yourself free. What can I do to help you? The hope I had of resolving this felt small, but I couldn't leave her alone. She hesitated, her gaze lost in the shadows. You need to understand that the pain is not just mine. It extends to your family, and I don't want this to continue anymore. If you can finish the letter I never completed, perhaps I can find peace. A letter? The idea sounded strange, but I knew it was important. Where can I find it? In the furniture, in the drawers. I left fragments of my life here. If you can piece them together, maybe you can free me. But be careful, Emily. The room does not want you to discover the truth. I felt the pressure around me, as if the walls were closing in. I will find the letter, Margaret. I promise. You don't have to be alone here. She smiled sadly, and her image began to fade slowly. Remember, love is a powerful force, but it can also be destructive. Don't let the pain consume you as it consumed me. Margaret. Don't go. I shouted, but she was already disappearing, and the room began to tremble. The atmosphere grew heavy, and I realized that time was running out. I needed to act quickly. With renewed purpose, I began to search the drawers and dust-covered furniture, rummaging through everything in search of answers. The letter, where are you? I murmured as the shadows seemed to close in. Margaret's whispers still echoed in my mind, and I couldn't give up. Finally, in a dusty drawer, I found a piece of yellowed paper. It was a letter, but it was incomplete. The words were fragmented, and the ink was smudged, but I could feel the urgency of her emotions. My beloved. I am so scared. I can't live without you, our child. Her words cut through me like a knife. I needed to understand. What had happened to her child? And what could I do to help her? As I read and reread each line, the room began to emit a strange energy. The whispers intensified, and Margaret's pain became palpable. I could feel her presence, and the room seemed alive, pulsating with the energy of her tragedy. "Margaret, I am here. I will finish your letter." I shouted, but the room was now in chaos, as if it were trying to push me away. The walls seemed to constrict, and I knew I needed to be quick. With a pencil I found nearby, I began to write the words Margaret could never finish. "My beloved, even if the world separates us, my love for you is eternal. Hashtag hashtag hashtag, I feel the absence of our child and the pain it brings, but I cannot let fear consume me. I promise that I will fight for us, for our story." I was writing with such emotion that tears streamed down my face. "I will never forget you, and I hope that one day we can meet again, where there is no pain, where love can flourish freely." As I wrote, the room began to vibrate, and an intense light started to emanate from my side. But then, a feeling of despair washed over me. The room was collapsing, shadows twisting as if they wanted to trap me. I knew time was running out. "Margaret, I'm done. Are you ready to be free?" I shouted, my voice nearly lost in the storm that was forming. The light intensified, and I saw an image of Margaret materializing before me, stronger than before. "You did it, Emily. You freed me." Her voice echoed with a note of joy. But as the light grew, I felt a deep connection. Something was changing, and a dark truth began to surface. The bond between us was stronger than I had imagined, and the room, with its pain and love, was now becoming a battlefield. "Margaret, no. What's happening?" I yelled as the shadows twisted around me. "Emily, the connection is stronger than we thought. You need to be strong now. Remember, love can free, but it can also bind." Her voice was distant, and the lights began to engulf me. I felt a growing pressure, as if the room was trying to. The environment around me was charged with palpable tension, as if the house itself was breathing, waiting for something to happen. The room where everything had begun seemed to have gained a life of its own. The walls trembled slightly, objects moved with a strange energy, and the atmosphere was filled with a fear I had never felt before. I looked at the faces of Emily, Jake, and Lily, who were gathered by my side, their wide eyes reflecting the same mix of fear and determination I felt. I knew we needed to face this together. "David, we need to get out of here," Emily said, her voice trembling. "This room, it's not just a space. It's a prison. And what if Margaret can't escape without our help?" I retorted, trying to keep my voice steady despite the insecurity growing in my chest. "She's trapped between two worlds. We need to understand what happened. But what if it costs us our lives?" Jake questioned, his gaze darting to the shattered window, where the vortex of light and shadows was forming. "What more do we need to know?" "I don't know, but we have to try. If there's a chance to save Margaret and our family, we need to find out," I replied, deciding there was no turning back. Our fate seemed intertwined with that of a woman we had never known, yet somehow felt so familiar. With a deep sigh, I walked toward Margaret's diary, which lay open on one of the dust-covered tables. The yellowed pages were filled with her anguish and yearnings, but there was a section that remained unexplored. I turned the pages gently, and then I found the blank part that caught my attention. It was as if she was summoning me to complete her unfinished words. "I need to do this," I said aloud, feeling the weight of that decision. "I need to finish the letter." "Are you sure?" Emily asked, concerned, but I could see hope in her eyes. "What if this only binds her more to you?" "Maybe that's what she needs," I affirmed. "Maybe I'm the only one who can understand her pain, because somehow, I feel we're connected." The other family members exchanged glances, and a heavy silence hung in the air. I picked up a pen that lay on the table, the ink nearly dry but still functional. The feeling that I was about to do something monumental enveloped me. Heart racing, I began to write. "My dear, I don't know if you will ever read these words. The weight of my pain is so great, and the distance that separates us is unbearable. I feel that time is running out and that life is slipping away from me, but hope still shines within me. If you ever learn of my love, know that it never died. As I wrote, the room seemed to respond, pulsing with an almost hypnotic rhythm. The walls trembled slightly, and the light from the vortex at the window intensified, illuminating the space with a supernatural glow. A cold breeze brushed past me, as if Margaret were there, watching every move I made. "David, look!" Lily exclaimed, pointing at the window. "The light, it's changing. Keep going, David." Emily urged, placing a hand on my shoulder, giving me strength. "You're doing this." My hands trembled as I wrote the final words. "If you're listening, know that I will always be with you, even if life has separated us. Don't let pain keep us apart." As soon as I wrote the last word, the room began to vibrate intensely. It was as if a wave of energy was building up, and the vortex at the window started to spin faster, like a hurricane of light and shadows. I could hear a whisper, a distant echo that seemed to grow louder, calling for me, calling for Margaret. "David, what's happening?" Jake shouted, looking around, visibly scared. "I don't know," I replied, trying to stay focused. "But we need to keep going. We can't stop now." And then, in a burst of light, the room was completely illuminated, and a figure began to materialize before us. It was her, Margaret. Her face was a mix of beauty and sadness, and her eyes reflected deep despair. She looked at me, and I felt an instant connection, as if I had known her from other lives. "You completed the letter," she said, her voice soft yet filled with emotion. "You heard my call. Margaret, I feel that you're trapped here." "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She shook her head, tears streaming down her ethereal face. "I couldn't move on. The love I lost, the life I never had, all of this trapped me in this place." "But you need to be free," Emily interjected, her voice firm. "We want to help." "Yes, but how?" Margaret asked, her gaze shifting to me. "You need to accept your past. Let go of what binds you. I am your descendant. I feel that we are connected in a way I never could have imagined," I confessed, the truth spilling from my mouth without hesitation. Margaret's expression changed, and for a brief moment, I saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "You are my legacy. My blood." "Yes," I affirmed, emotion flooding my heart. "And I want you to find peace. Let your pain transform into love. Your story doesn't have to end like this." "But how can I do that?" she asked, and the room began to tremble even more, as if it were falling apart around us. "You need to free yourself from the pain," I said, sensing that the answer was there, in the air. "Tell me what you need to do." Margaret looked at the vortex, which had now become a pulsating portal. "I have to strip away my memories. Let go of the love I could never live. But you have to help me do this." I looked at Emily, Jake, and Lily, who were by my side, all with determined expressions. "We're with you, Margaret. You're not alone." "Then, let's go together," Margaret said, extending her hand toward me. "Help me cross this threshold. Together, we can break the chains that bind me." With a deep breath, I reached out and touched her. The moment our hands met was like an explosion of energy. I could feel her pain, the sorrow that kept her trapped, but I also sensed the strength of the love that transcended time. "Let's go, Margaret," I shouted, feeling the room shake even more. "Free yourself." With one last glance at my family, Margaret began to dissolve into light, her ethereal form transforming into a wave of brilliance. The vortex at the window expanded, and I knew the moment was approaching. "You can do this. Go ahead," I encouraged her, my voice echoing in the space. And then, in a final instant, Margaret smiled, a smile full of gratitude and love. Thank you, my dear. You've given me what I needed most. Freedom. With that, she launched herself into the vortex, and the room exploded in a blinding glow. The sound of shattering crystals filled the air, and I felt a wave of energy surge through my body. It was as if all her memories were being released, as if the house was finally shedding a weight that had oppressed it for so long. But as the light intensified, a feeling of panic began to grow within me. No. Margaret, wait. I shouted, but her words echoed in my mind. You will always be a part of me, David. Never forget love.